So it's rarely ever the body itself that's the form of pain generation. It's almost always something that has to do with what inputs it's getting or not getting. The point I'm making is that the body does not want to be in pain. It always seeks balance or homeostasis if it's given its natural requirements, and the emotions are the interaction between the mind and the body. The emotions are an expression of the threat that the body is under, or the emotions are the pain that's now being medicated by junk food, drugs, etc. So you see there's this dynamic interplay between mind and body, but the body is always trying to bring you toward balance, and that's what your instincts do. Your instincts tell you at a deep level when you're moving in the wrong direction to support life itself. And then we've also got an approach to the body that is drug-based, chemically based, surgically based, and symptom-based, because it's so profitable, and we avoid actually the opportunity to do the deeper work of connecting to the body, loving the body, and learning from the body, and letting it guide us to what thoughts, feelings, emotions, beliefs, and behaviors are actually detrimental to the body.
Welcome to Beyond the Pain, the podcast that explores what it really takes to break free from chronic pain and reclaim your life. I'm your host, Lee Brandon, and someone who's spent over 2 decades helping people get to the root cause of pain that no one else could explain. Whether you're dealing with long-term back issues, joint pain, nerve discomfort, or mysterious symptoms that just won't go away, this show is here to help you go deeper. Because beyond the pain, there's clarity, strength, and power waiting for you. Each week, we'll uncover the physical, emotional, biochemical, and energetic causes of pain and how to transform them. Let's dive deep into this week's episode. Pain is something we all experience, but very few of us are ever taught how to truly understand it. Today's episode is a very special one for me personally. I'm joined by someone who has been a teacher, a colleague, and a friend for many years, and it is Paul Chek. Paul has spent decades exploring human health through a truly holistic lens, integrating biomechanics, nutrition, psychology, emotional awareness, and spiritual development. In this conversation, we go far beyond pain as a symptom and instead explore pain as a teacher, a messenger, and often a guide towards deeper awareness and growth. We talk about the emotional and psychological roots of physical pain, how our past experiences shape the way pain shows up in the body, and why the biopsychosocial model offers a far more complete understanding of healing than conventional approaches. We also explore the role of community, consciousness, and personal responsibility, and why healing rarely happens in isolation. This is a thoughtful, honest, and deeply human conversation, one that I believe will resonate with everyone who's ever felt that their pain has a deeper story behind it. So settle in, keep an open mind, and enjoy this conversation with Paul Chek. Paul, welcome back on the show. It's great to have you back on. It's great to
Thank you.
Always great to have a conversation with you. It seems like the only time we have a long conversation is on a podcast these days.
Yeah, that's why I like them.
And I think you're the first person to come on the podcast 3 times.
Oh, cool.
Which is good. And I was thinking earlier today, who else has been on more than once? And I think they're all Czech trained, apart from Daniel Reutas, who's been on twice as well.
Yeah, he's a good podcast.
Matt Walden's been on twice. Rob Brinded has been on twice. And Liz Wong, I don't know if you remember Liz Wong. I think you've only met her once.
There's so many Czech practitioners now, it's hard to remember them all.
Yeah. Yeah, she studied with Peter Levine.
Oh, okay.
And then has done some other stuff, which sounds even better. But yeah, so what I really want to go through today is really reach out to people that are struggling with pain.
Mm-hmm.
So, as you know, there's lots of those out there.
Yeah.
What I think would be a good place to start would be if you could share, because when I was thinking about this earlier, I could think of three, because obviously I know your background very well. I could think of three incidents that really stand out to me. But from your own story, what would be your first or most memorable experiences with pain? And how did those experiences kind of shape the way that you view pain today?
I think my earliest experience of pain was emotional pain. When I was my father left my mother when I was 3, and then my mom had me at 16 and my brother at 17 and my sister at 18, and she was all alone, and she was working 2 back-to-back waitressing jobs to pay a babysitter to watch us. And I just remember the feeling of sensing my mom's sort of inner stress and chaos, and me wondering why my father's not there and not understanding it. And I remember when I was in the 3rd grade, I couldn't read. For some reason, I couldn't read. I just, I think all the stress of what was going on in my mother and in between my mother and my father, and just my mother's struggles and me missing my mother all the time and my father all the time, had created sort of a blanket of insecurity inside of me. But I had the sort of, when I reflect back on it, it just makes my breath tighten up. Like, it makes it hard to breathe. And I just didn't know what to do. I kind of had a sense of hopelessness, like not hopelessness, but helplessness. Like, what do I do about this? But I think my greatest memory of real intense pain, other than, the physical pain of fighting with my brother or cutting myself by accident working on the farm or whatever, was when my father died. My father drowned when I was 8, and I remember the day like it was yesterday, when a policeman came to the door. By this time my mother had remarried. We were living on a pig farm in Idaho, where we had 10 acres and a pig farm. And we had a long driveway, so I just happened to see the police car driving up the driveway, and immediately I thought, that's odd. I wonder why a policeman's coming to our door. But he told my mother that my father had died. And my mother didn't really say very much about how he died or anything, so that was kind of a mystery till later. But there's not really any words to describe the pain. It was I only experienced that type of pain again when my brother committed suicide when I was, I think, 34 or 35. But I had a hard time believing that my father had died. And strangely enough, my grandparents were coming to visit us. And this is my father, on my father's side. And I had a dream one night. Well, I think it was the night before my grandfather arrived. And in the dream, I was at my father's funeral, and I was hovering around watching the funeral, and I saw the gravestone. And when my grandfather was there with us, he knew, how painful it was for us, and it was obviously painful for them too. But my grandfather said to me, would you like me to describe your father's gravestone? And I said, I've already seen it. And he had a look of shock on his face. He said, how? I said, I saw it in a dream, and I described it to him. And he said, well, that's exactly what it is. And even though I had this confirmation from my grandfather that my father had died, I still had a hard time believing it. And I remember just looking for him everywhere. And there was a couple of times when we were driving on the freeway and I thought I saw him in another car, and I got really emotional, but my mom would get upset because she's like, no, your father can't be in another car. He's not alive anymore. But it took me probably about 4 years before I finally was able to just realize that he wasn't coming back. And so that sort of deep sense of loss and emptiness, it made it really hard for me to focus in school unless I was doing sports. Then I could forget about it. But that was probably my first real experience of pain, and not the kind of pain you can medicate either, unfortunately. But then when my brother committed suicide, that was, at that time, with that many years under your belt, your cognitive process, you're much more aware of what you're feeling and what it means. And so, I think that was even harder because my mind started attaching all sorts of labels to it. And of course you go into a sort of a review of like, how could have I have loved him better? And, not realizing that he was always in trouble because he was a drug addict by the time he was in the 7th grade. And the environment of my childhood, my stepfather was not he didn't know how to raise a child. He treated us like animals and slave labor. And so, it was just, hard because I look back on our childhood and all the pain we'd been through, together. And, it was just something that you really struggle with because once you're old enough to understand relationships, you can't be helped but be plagued with, how could have I have prevented this? And, it took me a lot of healing. It took me years of deep healing and plant medicine ceremonies and meditation and talking to my soul and talking to his soul. And, yeah, so there's two types of pain that don't shake easily.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, as you said, you was only 8, right, when your father passed away. If you don't deal with those traumas, they can come back to bite you later in life, right?
Well, they're always working in the unconscious. So it's not that they come back. The real reality is, if we don't have a conscious means by which we can first seek to understand and make meaning out of any painful event, then it sits in the unconscious. And you remember, I want to preface what I'm going to say. We have to understand consciousness we have to have a framework for consciousness. My favorite definition of consciousness, in paraphrase, is from Edward Edinger, MD, who is a psychiatrist and a very famous Jungian analyst and a very deep and profound man who wrote many excellent books that I've studied. Edinger said in his book on consciousness, consciousness is a psychic substance produced not blindly, but in living awareness of opposites. And so the key words there is that consciousness is a psychic substance. It's something palpable. If I say to you, Lee, what are you doing with your right hand right now? There's something in you that's very, very aware. If I say, do you remember, when you last got hurt? There's something there that's very real, that's tangible to you. You can bring it up in your mind and even see it through imagery very easily. So when we understand that, painful events that we can't understand, the pain is a great quickener of consciousness. So it brings our focus right to it because it's a survival strategy. But because, for example, my father's death or my brother's death were so intense, then there's an intense attempt inside of us to try to understand and to resolve and to try to make meaning out of it. But to the degree we don't have a framework or a context of understanding and meaning making, you have what turns out to be like a ball of energy that carries all the unresolved thoughts, feelings, emotions, beliefs, insecurities, and that resides in the personal unconscious. But the personal unconscious is actually as fused into our psychophysical reality as wetness is to water. And the key point is that when you look at what painful or fearful events do to you, the first thing they do is they alter your breathing, and you go into a fear breathing pattern where you tighten up and you start to breathe faster because you're taking on oxygen to prepare to fight or flee. And then you have all the insecurities attached to it of the what, the why, the when, the how, what for, and the unresolved emotion and the fear that brings up when we can't make meaning. And so that actually sits in our body. And if you look at the structure of the 7 chakra system, which is quite reliable as a map of the psychophysical reality, wherever it's unresolved, that psychic substance is in play as a dynamic creative force. So for my father's death, it was a big threat to my sense of safety and security. So it hovers down in the region of the pelvic floor, the sex organs, and the sacrum, and throughout the sciatic distribution. And if the body isn't healthy enough to compensate and be able to carry the psychic load, then it has the same effect on a body that's not healthy, that's got physical load on it. And so when you have a pooling of psychic energy like that, it excites the fascia, and the fascia is an electret, which means it produces an electrical current when you deform it, such as when you stretch or tighten a muscle. And it's very sensitive to psychic energy. And fascia is largely water. It's about 95 to 98% water. And water is highly receptive to psychic energy. Water has a frequency range of 65 octaves, which is almost bordering on infinite. And so the psychic energy interacts with the water, which interacts with the fascia. And so the fascia begins to mold itself into a physical manifestation of the psychic energy. And that disrupts the flow of blood, it disrupts the flow of nutrition and oxygen coming in and waste going out. It disrupts the natural flow of the lymphatic system. It disrupts the biomechanics and kinesiology of the regions that it's held in, which ultimately trigger a global response. And it disrupts the flow of energy through meridians, so it can have a damaging effect on the harmony of the internal organs and glands, all of which produces a psychic effect. And then you got the heart aspects of it. The loss of someone you love is very painful in the heart. So now you got root chakra, you got 4th chakra, and whenever we have a wound in the heart, it actually is a wound to our sense of our feeling of safety to connect in relationship. But if it's unconscious, it creates an overlay that can make us afraid at an unconscious level to go to become too connected to anybody, because there's a fear that you might lose them too. And if a child doesn't have the capacity to understand it, it might actually make the mistake, and this often happens, of thinking that it's the one that caused the problem. Mommy and daddy aren't together because of something I did. Daddy died because of something I did. Mommy and daddy are fighting because of something I did. And so the child that has grown up into an adolescent or an adult that starts to have more intimate connections can actually start acting in ways and relating in ways that limit the ability for people to feel a deeper connection to you and you a deeper connection to them. And so then when you get into intimate relationships, you're likely to run into trouble because your partner might say things like, it doesn't feel like you're there, or it doesn't feel like you're really connecting to me. And so what I'm pointing out is that there's definite energetic changes, there's definite physical and physiological changes, and ultimately those changes lead to more pain, and that pain redirects our awareness. But because our culture is so shallow with its understanding of anatomy, physiology, and subtle anatomy, and subtle energy, and psychology, then those pains keep getting treated as though they're physical problems, and they're being treated at the symptomatic level. But most people, as you know, can go to 30 or 40 doctors and God knows how many therapists before anybody knows to ask them the right questions or read the body appropriately or help them get to the root issues. And so what you actually see is what starts off as situations like I've described turn out to be health problems, digestion problems, elimination problems, breathing problems, circulatory problems, headaches. Then they manifest as musculoskeletal problems. Then they manifest as relationship problems and job problems and progressively greater levels of disablement. And there's often very, very little likelihood that a person can gain the awareness from the pain that the body and the psyche is trying to give the individual, because without having spiritually enough to evolve leaders and teachers and parents, they don't teach us how to connect into our heart or into our soul or into our body from a spiritual level where we could easily get directed. Like in my life now, where I have such a deep connection to my own soul and my own inner self, if I had some kind of pain that I didn't understand at the cognitive level, I can either easily direct my awareness and intention into that region of the body and literally, fortunately for me, I'm clairvoyant, so I can look and see what's in there. I can see the images held in there. I can also feel the energy. And so I can ask my soul, what is it that's going on here? And then my soul, which is inherently an aspect of the unconscious, can consciously direct me as to, oh, that's the residues from an argument that you had, or it's your fear of not having enough money or whatever it might be. And that's really why I train Chek professionals, as you very well know, how to understand the body physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, structurally, biomechanically, biochemically, etc., so that we as Chek professionals have actually a context and a framework of understanding and a means of assessing to actually help people get beneath the symptomatic expressions of pain and dysfunction to get to what we would classify as etiology, or actual real causes.
I'm going to pause briefly to clarify something about a program I've mentioned recently, and it's called Beyond the Pain: Discover and Remove the Foods Fueling Your Pain in Just 14 Days. It's not a traditional diet program. It doesn't involve strict meal plans, calorie counting, or long-term restriction. Instead, it's an educational, short-term process designed to help participants understand how food, inflammation, and the nervous system interact in their own body. People often join because they want clarity, not another set of rules. The program begins on the 2nd of March, and enrollment is currently open. You'll find all the details in the show notes for this episode. Now, back to the podcast. Yeah, from your history, what are you now, 64?
64, man, still going strong.
Because I also know over the years you've had your own physical pains as well, right?
Oh, shit, yeah. Loads of them. I'm
Right?
a crazy man.
So, I mean, the ones that really stand out to me is the time when you drove your motocross cycle into a load of logs.
Yes, that was a
You
bad
broke
one.
you broke your leg cliff diving, right?
I broke my leg in 5 places cliff diving as well.
And
I've actually had,
the other one that really stands out to me is when you drop that guy on your head as well.
well, that one I'm still working on. That,
But I guess
but
my question is, because this is something that I've had discussions with a few people recently, and some people say when something like that happens, it's because of something your body's trying to tell you. There's no such thing as an accident. And then
mhm.
there's other people I know that would say, no, don't be silly. That's just an accident. That's just a physical thing. It just happened. What's your view on that?
Well, I think it's a complex issue. I've had many students ask me this question in my career. Um, I will approach this as and make it as clear as I can, but it's a really complex issue. So, first of all, each soul comes with, shall we say, a desire or desires and an intention for what it wants to accomplish in its lifetime. It wants to engage the necessary challenges and relationships that ultimately help it grow. And each of us has an innate genius that we bring into the whole. We each hold a piece of the puzzle of humanity at any given time on the planet. And so, the real function of parenting is not to program your children to think and act in the ways that you want them to or tell them what to do. It's to create sort of a potpourri of opportunities, exposure to music, exposure to art, exposure to the basic sciences, mathematics, poetry, um, exercise, um, social studies, history, uh, all the things that we can put in front of a child so that they not only develop a well-rounded general education, but their heart buzzer goes off. So if a soul's here to be a musician, whenever it hears music playing, it'll be very attracted to it. And if there's a certain type of music that rings true to its path, like rock and roll music or jazz music or classical music or healing music, it'll express affection for that. Like a 3-year-old might go and start touching the TV and want to touch the person playing that music. So if the parents are aware, they'll say, oh, whenever we hear that type of music, Johnny gets really excited. Maybe we should give him a piano or a little keyboard or whatever. And so all these things are actually calling to us. So the point I'm making is the soul is entelechy, which means guiding influence. Now, we can't learn and grow without challenges because challenges are ultimately how we test knowledge and synthesize it. And you can't have real knowledge without making mistakes. And ultimately, first you have information, then you have experience, then you have mistakes, and then you have synthesis, which produces wisdom. So when we're moving through life, there are any number of opportunities. For example, if you didn't get enough sleep and you're trying to hang pictures and you got to climb up a ladder, but your body's tired and you don't realize where your foot's at and you think you're stepping on a rung of the ladder, but you miss it and you come flying off the ladder and give yourself a concussion, that could just be an act of what we would call an accident or just the misfortune of the moment. But from the soul's perspective, it's another opportunity in order for us to be directed back into ourself. And that challenge becomes an opportunity. Like what, it's pretty hard, unless you're pretty unconscious. It's pretty rare that you have any kind of what we would call an accident that produces pain or injury that ultimately does not lead to learning, and also often into new relationships. Like every single one of the people, with rare exception, that's ever hired me as a therapist came to me because they had pain, but often I developed really deep and meaningful relationships that turned out to be very nurturing for them because I gave them knowledge about many aspects of their life that they didn't know they were coming for. For example, they might have broken an ankle but ended up learning how to connect to their own soul, or many other things, or how to eat, or a wide variety of things depending on the circumstance of the situation and the relationship. So the pain actually becomes something that quickens consciousness, something that enhances relationships, something that accelerates learning, something that illuminates awareness, because the next time you're on a ladder, you'll be a lot more careful. And then, so my point with this is that there are accidents that are just accidents, but the soul will take advantage of any accident because they're always opportune. Whenever pain's around, I call that the pain teacher. The pain teacher is always there to help you grow in some way that is meaningful. Then there are challenges that the soul often brings with it. It can bring unresolved illnesses, which are called miasms in subtle energy conception. So if a child, for example, is born but has asthma, it may be because it had asthma in its last life from an unresolved emotional trauma, and it carries it in this life because it still needs to work on that challenge. Steiner speaks of this. Homeopathic experts speak of this. There's plenty of writings on it, and I've seen plenty of cases of it in my own life. But the soul actually can and frequently does bring the seeds of illness and even disease with it. And I know I've spoke about this before, but did you ever read any of the books by Margaret A. Newman, the holistic nurse?
No.
Well, her work on pain and illness and injury is phenomenal. And actually her work really helped me grow up a lot as a therapist, because I used to treat pain as just, something that happened to people. And I had the immature perception that largely most of the people's pains that I was working with as a therapist was the result of some kind of ignorance or negligence on their own part. And therefore, you go to a gym, don't know what to do in a gym, you get hurt. You get into a marriage and you don't know how to be in a marriage and you get hurt. But what I learned from Margaret Newman and her vast experience of being a holistic nurse and very, very spiritually evolved woman was that the soul often needs and creates pain to, interestingly, to take us into what I have referred to in many cases with patients as an internship. And so she describes how a person might get cancer, and that cancer will be a means of that soul learning about how to better take care of a body, how to look into the emotional aspects of what could lead to the cancer, or the mental aspects, or the belief systems, or the behaviors, or the fears and insecurities. And that ultimately, through the process of healing, the person becomes what is called the wounded healer, which means they are authentically capable of having empathy and compassion for people that they work with. And they have a depth of knowledge that's rooted in experience, not just the memorization of stuff that other people told them in schools and things like that, or that they read out of books, which is a very shallow level of knowledge for a therapist or a doctor, and potentially misleading. So and I can tell you, I've seen cases like this. I've had people in my life. My mom had two close friends when I was young, and they were both devotees of the Self-Realization Fellowship. They were very knowledgeable on holistic health. They were very clean living and very loving people. And I remember being shocked. At first, the husband got brain cancer and died not long after, and then his wife got brain cancer and died not long after. And so I remember thinking, how is it that people that had such a high level of health conscious, they had enough exercise to be like, there was no reason for these people to go out that way, yet they did. So, and there's been a number of other cases like that in my life where when I read Margaret Newman's teachings, then I began working with my own soul and speaking to the souls of others that came to me, which has been going on now. I've been doing deep work with my soul for probably, 25 or 30 years. I can't remember, a long time now. But in my conversations with the souls of people that have come to me with all sorts of chronic health problems and serious diseases, even stage 4 cancer, I've often been told that the soul was taking this on because this person was actually here to be some form of a healer, whether it be a social worker, a psychologist, a physiotherapist, a researcher. And I've had countless cases where that turned out to be exactly the case. And many of them are Chek professionals, actually. And I've got podcasts with someone like Greg Schmaus as a perfect case. Jason Picard is another one. Mike Salemi's another one. So, what I'm saying in a nutshell is that there's pain that is instructional, that we can be doing all the right things, and there's no rational explanation for why we have the kinds of health challenges or pain that we do. And those can be the impetus of the soul creating both a rite of passage into our own adulthood with taking care of ourselves and responsibility for ourselves, but also an internship into the path or the dharma that the soul came here to use for its own growth, but also to support other people in their growth. Then there's one more issue with accidents. And if you look at quantum physics shows you cannot predict the future with any accuracy because everyone's co-creating the future at the same time. All you can analyze is what they call a probability wave. So, for example, when we're during an election period, the people that are tracking those that are voting for Trump versus someone else or whoever it might be, they can't really know what the outcome is until the votes are counted. But what they can do is take polls and say, okay, right now the probability is that this person's going to win the election. But all of a sudden, it changes because people hear something that they don't like and they change their opinion, and all of a sudden you get a different outcome. So when you look at the events of our life, our relationship with ourself, our relationship with others, our belief systems, our fears, our insecurities, our unresolved wounds, we're actually generating a probability wave everywhere we go. For example, somebody that, like my brother, that learned early through negative influences in elementary school, which began with marijuana. I don't know who gave it to him first, but somebody gave him marijuana, and he found it was alleviating of his pain. So he became, very used to smoking marijuana all the time, which then just led to harder and harder drugs till it was crack cocaine, heroin, and whatever else. But you see, the probability that exists in the life of someone like my brother that they're going to go from one drug experience to another experience is very, very high. The probability that they're going to get skilled help that really helps a child like that deal with the pain that's driving the attraction to the means or mechanism for reducing their perception of pain, be it alcohol, marijuana, or any other drug, the probability that they're going to get help is very low. If you have a bad attitude and you tend to treat other people disrespectfully, there's a higher and higher probability every time you do that that somebody is going to do that to you. So what I have observed is that when we are unconscious, as an analogy, imagine you have a gun and you're standing in the middle of a suburb or a city, and you just close your eyes and point that gun in any direction. Well, there's a good probability you're going to actually hit somebody because there's a lot of people around you. So if we keep doing that, just like Russian roulette, there's only one bullet in the chamber, but every time you spin the barrel and do it again, the probability goes higher that you're going to blow your brains out. So from a probability perspective, I think that we're always putting out energy and it's magnetic. So if you're acting like an asshole everywhere you go, you become magnetic to assholes and you meet yourself. This is why Jung said, if you don't meet your unconscious on the inside, it will meet you on the outsides in the events of your life, and you will call it fate. So really what he's saying is, if you're unconscious of the probabilities you're generating, they will show up in the events of your life. And if you're still unconscious, you'll become the victim and it'll be everybody else's fault. And the prisons are full of these types of situations. So I think we have to be conscious of how we manage ourselves physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, because we're always generating probabilities, simply put, that can take us into greater likelihood of experiencing more love and connection and meaning, or more fear, insecurity, pain, and disablement. And when you look at the lack of parenting skill and the dysfunctional education system that we have most of the places worldwide, and the severe pathology in religious indoctrination and all the fears and insecurities and making people afraid of God and making them feel like sinners, like they're fallen, like they're, being punished and all that, you set up early in a child's life, you set up probabilities that aren't really based on love. They're based on fear, and they're based on guilt and shame.
Every week, I meet people who've been told their pain is just aging, just wear and tear, or something they just have to live with. And almost always, there's a deeper cause that's being missed. Gut stress, emotional load, sleep disruption, food sensitivities, poor breathing patterns, movement imbalances. And when we look at everything together, the picture becomes clear. If you feel something important has been overlooked, book a discovery call with me at bodycheck.co.uk/consultation. That's bodycheck.co.uk/consultation. All right, back to the episode.
Those things actually have a magnetic effect. And if a person's not conscious, for example, if a person's not conscious that God is the source of all, and that everybody and every living thing's an expression of God, but they believe that they're God's chosen people, or that if you're not a Christian, that you're going to burn in hell, then they can actually justify horrific ways of relating to people and killing people because they think they're doing God's work. And the probability is that when you do that to other people, they're going to do it to you. And that, religious differences are the number one cause of war throughout history, right to this very day. So there you see the probability is if the Christians keep telling the Muslims they're wrong and that they're not God's people, and the Muslims keep calling Christians infidels and citing jihad, well, the Christians and Muslims have a long history. As long as those religions have been around, they've been torturing and killing each other. So the probability just stays very, very high that you're going to get killed because your perception and belief about God is actually a myth that is not well understood and is being perpetuated by adults that are very, very ignorant and just believe what they read in books with no depth of understanding of how to read scripture. So what I'm hoping to make clear is that the other way we get hurt is we generate a probability wave, and through psychological development, understanding how to manage ourselves in relationships, learning nonviolent communication, and hopefully having a wholesome understanding of concepts about God, we decrease the probability of attracting the events to us that force us to question ourselves, and we increase the probability of more wholesome, loving relationships that foster growth in that direction. And I think that's a real big problem in the world to this very day.
Yeah. I mean, looking back at those 3 incidents that you had that I mentioned, the motocross accident, the cliff diving, and the dropping the guy on your head, do you look back now and think that they were accidents, or did they have deeper meanings for you at the time?
Well, you know me well enough to know, I mean, you've spent countless hours in classrooms with me, and we wrote a book together, and, you know, I think you know a lot about my life, and you know what I did with it. I've had so much pain and so many broken bones, and no, to be fair, I earned a lot of that, meaning, I was a competitive motocross racer. I was a nationally ranked motocross racer. There's no such thing as a motocross racer that does not get thrown off their bike and get hurt. They don't exist. You know, I was a boxer and a kickboxer. It's the hurting game. Now, I was a boxer and a kickboxer because I was so afraid my dad was going to kill somebody that I felt if I didn't learn to defend myself and my family, that something worse would happen. But I got a lot of pain from that. When I was racing motocross, we were out practicing, and it was in the middle of summer, and we were on a track built out of logging roads, and we didn't realize that the logging company had come out and started cutting trees down and stacking them right into the road. And my buddy was ahead of me going full speed, and he swerved around this pile of logs, but there was so much dust I couldn't even see where he was at, and I drove straight into a pile of logs at about 60 plus miles an hour, which put me unconscious for over 2 days with a severe coma, and I had internal bleeding because a branch of a tree went right through my guts. And so what I'm telling you is that each of these experiences wounded me so badly, and there's been so many of them, that every time if I went to a doctor, they almost always said the same thing. Well, you should quit boxing, or you should quit racing motorcycles. That's stupid. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, that's what I'd love to do. That's like telling someone who gets injured having good sex that they should just quit having sex. I mean, that's, it's just like so shallow. It's unbelievable. My goal was to get back on my motorcycle as fast as possible and win as much as possible. And anything that got in the way was just not going to be adhered to. And so each of these events actually forced me, because I couldn't get help from people around me, to go deeper into my body. And I remember being in severe pain. One time I missed a bridge going about 75 miles an hour in a road race, and I literally flew a long ways, landed in a riverbed that didn't have a lot of water because it was summertime, but there was big boulders, and I bounced across that riverbed like a rock being skipped across the water, tore my rectum right open, had internal bleeding, crushed my helmet, was very badly injured. And I had to go so deep into myself, and I was in so much pain that I remember my inner voice saying, move into a position that feels good. And so I would have to roll over, and oftentimes I found I had to be in the fetal position, but if I laid in that position very long, my neck would start to hurt, or my shoulder. So my inner voice would say, roll on your back. And so what I found is that by just listening to my body, it would tell me what to do. And that when I started to try to use exercise to get stronger, if it hurt, then my inner voice said, just do a different exercise. And so I would just try something different. And I would go from, not being able to bend over and having to maybe only push weights above my head or whatever. And I would work on stretching and loosening myself up. And so over time, so what happened is I reached the point one day where I was a therapist. I remember when this happened to me, it was probably in my, I would guess, mid-30s. And out of the blue, I remember talking to somebody as a patient, and they said, Paul, you're the first person that can ever explain anything to me in a way that I can understand it. Doctors keep talking in all these fancy words, but I don't understand what the hell they mean. But whenever I talk to you, I understand what's going on with me. And why is it that all these doctors and therapists can't communicate effectively so that we, the patients, can understand what the hell's going on and what to do about it? And it, like a lightning bolt hit, it's like, oh my God, I have been injured so many times, and I've had to work my way back through it and had to investigate it for myself. And I've also had a background in so many different trades, from being a logger to a welder to a driller to an electrician to military to being a mechanic to a farmer to a salesman to you name it. So I realized that the path my soul had taken me on was one in which I would learn a way of seeing the world through the eyes of a welder or through the eyes of an electrician or as a mechanic. So by the time I had enough anatomy and physiology and training as a therapist, if I was working with an electrician, I could talk to them about their body and use wiring concepts. If I was talking to a plumber, I could use plumbing concepts. If I was talking to a carpenter, I could use those concepts. And so I realized that there was this magic golden thread through all the events of my life. And even though they were painful and I had no idea what was happening, it took me till I was approximately 35 years old to all of a sudden see that there was actually an invisible golden thread connecting these things together, and that all these events that seem separate and completely disconnected were actually part of the internship that my soul had laid out for me, so that by the time I became a therapist and a teacher, I could not only teach my patients, but I could teach my students how to understand very complex concepts, but also link them into their own experiences so they could understand and make meaning out of their own traumas, which once you make meaning, then you have the gateway open to freedom. If you can understand something, you remember the word understanding means that's under your standing. If the ground is moving under you, you can't be secure. You can't feel safe. So if the ground of our understanding about why we're having relationship problems or health problems or why our body hurts is not stable, then it always leaves us in a feeling of fear and insecurity and never understanding why this is happening. But if a skilled doctor or therapist can give you understanding and help you make meaning, once you have meaning, then spirit begins to flow. Whenever there's not meaning, for example, if I said, Lee, I want you to go to work in a factory putting on tires at a car factory, and all you're going to do all day is run an air wrench and go zzz, 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 and that's all you're going to do. But, if you could not make meaning out of why you're doing such a menial job with a brain as powerful as you, that'll start breaking you down. And what'll happen is, paradoxically, as simple as that job is, you'll start actually making mistakes and leaving wheels without lug nuts on them, or cross-threading them and using a high-powered wrench to force them on. And next thing you know, you'll be in trouble and you'll lose your job because you're screwing up so much. But ultimately, whenever there's a lack of meaning, then this flow of spirit is inhibited in our body. Our heart does not get involved, and we just sort of survive the circumstances we're in, which leads to a lot of physical, emotional, and mental pain, because the soul wants to grow, and the soul's trying to figure out a way out of it. But oftentimes we've been conditioned to believe that's the only thing we can do, and we work for money instead of love and all this other stuff. So I think, that's what happened to me, is I reached the realization that there is something far, far deeper going on in every soul, and that the pain that we don't understand, when we do understand, becomes a puzzle piece in the mandala of our own legacy. And until we understand it, there's an open hole in the puzzle piece. And no matter how beautiful the picture, the first place your eyes go to any puzzle is where there's an empty spot.
Yeah. So something that you've mentioned earlier, and obviously I've heard you say many, many times before, is that, we're physical, mental, emotional, spiritual beings. Can you perhaps walk us through, I know you've covered a few already, but maybe if you could just isolate each one and walk us through how pain can originate on each of those 4 levels.
Okay. Well, spirit means the flow of energy and information. Everything in the created universe is really, if you boil it down through a reductio ad absurdum to the bare minimum, you have energy, you have information, and you have frequency. God, or source, is pure potential. So until God dreams, there is nothing to manifest. So whatever source is, from a scientific perspective or an electrical perspective, we would call that pure potential. Like the battery in your car has 12 volts of potential, but until you turn the starter, it doesn't become a flow of energy and information. Now, there's not a lot of information in that. It's just on or off. But there's no way to explain what God's doing other than dreaming, because to have a mind requires a duality. So God is a zero force. 1 represents being. 2 represents duality. So the only way creation can come into existence is if God has the desire to experience itself, because by definition, God is that for which there is no other. There's nothing behind God. There's only within God. So the first act of creation is that God has the desire to know itself, which causes it to dream. And without a long, elaborate explanation, the dream, like all dreams, is populated with characters. When you dream, there's characters in the dream, be they animals or trees or people or dragons or whatever it is. Once we realize that we're dreaming, or that we're in a dream, which is called a lucid dream. So if in his dream Lee sees his mother and says to himself, oh, I'm dreaming and there's my mom, but instead of jumping out of the dream, chooses to stay in the dream and say, maybe mom's telling you that she got a diagnosis of cancer, but you have not been aware of that yet, nor has she at the cognitive level. And in the dream, you say to her, Mom, you really need to quit drinking or smoking or eat better. Now, without you even realize, now she might say something back to you, but once you're in a dream and you have the flow of energy and information between 2 points of sentience, now you've created a mind. So by definition, a mind is created whenever you have energy and information flowing between 2 points of sentience. So spirit actually manifests, as does mind, as a product of love. Love is the desire for God to know itself, in which the invisible, unknowable mystery dreams itself. The L of love stands for desire. We have to have the desire to live. If we commit suicide, we override our desire to live, which means we have free will. And then desire, drawn from the potential of zero, which is the O in love, produces VE, volt electron, which is will. So in the human psyche and in the cosmos and in creation itself, desire and will are reciprocals of each other. The more you desire, the more you will. So each soul, only God can give a soul. Each soul is the manifestation of some aspect of God in which it wants to become aware of and learn and grow into that expression of itself. And so what you have is when souls begin to communicate with each other and share their desires, their wants, their feelings, their needs, their dreams, you have a mind. Steiner describes thought as the flow of spirit. So thought is spirit. So once we understand that spirit, by definition, is the flow of energy and information, and the entire universe is the manifestation of God dreaming itself into existence, which creates the body of God, within which there's a myriad of relationships which produces mind, now you have a subject-object duality. The subject in Lee, which is called the I in Steiner's language, is actually the subject of God dreaming itself into existence. And the object of your attention right now, say my face and my voice, is where your intention or your consciousness is directed. And so we're directing consciousness at each other, which means the flow of energy and information. So spirit is essentially two things. It's the movement of potential into actuation through God dreaming itself into existence, which reproduces itself in all sentient beings. Even microorganisms are sentient of their own environment. They move toward food and pleasure and away from pain. And so every being of any type that has a sense of self-awareness, is actually embodied in the process of love and mind at its own unique level. And we are an accumulation of all the different levels of nature, from the water, the oceans, the air, the earth, the sun.
You are not broken. Pain isn't a punishment, it's communication. One of the clearest messages your body sends is through inflammation. When you nourish yourself in a way that supports your gut and immune system, pain naturally becomes easier to manage. The pain-free plate shows you 7 foods that help bring your body back towards balance. And you can download it for free at bodycheck.co.uk/pain-free-plate. Now, let's get back into the conversation.
All of it in an alchemical combination in which there is the flow of energy and information, or spirit. And so spirit is the driving impulse that organizes matter. Matter cannot organize itself. This is the problem with the belief that the brain produces consciousness. As I tell my students, how long would you have to stand next to a pile of rocks before a toaster oven or a Rolex jumped out? Well, it would be an eternal wait. But if you direct conscious energy and intention, and you say, well, let's melt those rocks down, smelt the metal out, form it into parts and assemble it. Now you actually have spirit acting on matter. And in alchemy, that's the fire element of desire and the air element of mind interacting as volatile elements with the passive elements of water and earth, which have to be moved externally. They can't move themselves. So the spiritual aspect of it is actually begins with desire and dreaming, and then is amplified by love, but is then directed by thought. And if our thoughts are unconscious, then we manifest things all around us unconsciously, such as, relationships that are not healthy, relationships to money that are limiting, etc. So the spiritual level is the most important because it's, as Steiner says, the spirit world is the world of causes. It's the level of causation in quantum physics. That's the implicate order of David Bohm, or the wave dimension of quantum physics. And quantum physics shows you that there's nothing there until you make measurement or observe it, which means you have an intention or you wouldn't be looking. So then the mental level is when we are actually processing energy and information and sharing it, and to share it with yourself as a relationship, because you're in relationship with your body. Your soul is in relationship with your body. So if I say, Lee, hold your hand up, tell me what you're looking at, you're going to say, my hand. If I say, how does your body feel today? You might say, well, my body feels good. So you're in a possessive relationship with your body. So there's already an energy and information exchange between you and your body, which is the flow of spirit. There's already a mind engaged, and it's either conscious or unconscious, but it's both at the same time. So spirit flows into mind. Mind then moves into the creation of a physical body, which is fluid-based in our case, and most life forms are fluid-based because consciousness resonates with water, and water is the great connector that makes energy and information flow in this world that we're in. And so the emotions in alchemy come from the water element. Water in alchemy means anything fluid. So we have different types of water in our body, from the inner ear to the inner eye, to saliva, to gastric juices, to blood, to lymph. Those are all the water element. And the water element is what produces emotion, and it also is what allows us to image. The cerebral spinal fluid is a specialized type of fluid that allows thoughts to be imaged within the brain. If there was no cerebral spinal fluid in your brain, you could not possibly hold an image in your mind. Water allows emotion to flow. So emotion means, as you know, energy in motion. So thoughts generate feelings because of the water element in the body, but the body itself, the liver, the glands, the tissues of all types, they can all generate emotions as well, because for all intensive purposes, every part of your body, such as your liver, your kidneys, your stomach, your intestinal tract, is a living being in and of itself and has a unique type of consciousness that relates specifically to what it does in the body. And so emotions can be generated, for example, if you're eating the wrong diet and it's throwing your biochemistry off, it's stressing the cells of your body or a given organ, and they will send emotions to your nervous system, which are indicators that you need to direct your attention there, because whatever you're doing is actually harming your body. And if you were just a robot with the flow of information and energy, but you had no feelings, then you may not be so inspired to do anything about it if you could compensate for it in some other way. But in the human body, because it's a biological organism, it has to have the requirements of life to be met consistently or it'll die. The body actually uses emotion because emotion acts at the below the cognitive process of the cerebral cortex. It acts at the level of the limbic system and influences the reptilian brain or the spinal cord and our deepest survival mechanisms. So the emotional aspects of us link thoughts and feelings and emotions together within the body so that we can have a feeling component to the mind and to our dreaming. And the physical manifestations of the body are structural. Your cells are all, enveloped in a membrane made of fat, largely in protein. Every part of your body has a specific function, has a specific type of construction, and has a specific way of moving energy. The way the bones move energy is different than the way fluids move energy, is different than the way fascia moves energy, is different than the way hair moves energy. So the way I look at it and the way I teach it based on alchemy and Kabbalah and other systems is that dreaming or spirit concentrates itself into mind. Mind concentrates or condenses itself into the astral dimension, which is a dimension of feeling and imaging. So astral dimension is the dimension that animates. It takes spirit and uses it to animate physical matter. Then the physical body is the condensation of, or the crystallization of, the dreaming and the thinking into manifestation and form. So what we have is a bidirectional feedback system where our thoughts, feelings, emotions, beliefs, and dreams feed into the body, which produces sensation and awareness, and everything that we do physically, emotionally, or mentally, or verbally produces information that's in a real-time feedback loop with the universe. So just like if I poke you with a pin, you'll react immediately. Your brain will be aware of it. The awareness of the pin triggers a reflex, a withdrawal reflex. The withdrawal reflex tells the brain the pain's now gone. And so you have a constant feedback loop between Lee's overarching sense of himself and the region of the body that just got threatened. Well, from a cosmic perspective, and this has been studied in quantum physics, and it's quite well, John Wheeler, for example, said that the universe is a self-aware universe and gave quantum physics mathematics and explanations to demonstrate evidence of that. So everything that's happening in the universe at the spirit level and the astral level is condensing itself down through the elements into a physical reality, which we call the universe. But everything that's happening within all beings of all types, in all times and all places, is in real-time feedback with the whole of the universe itself, because everything that's in the universe is in its body, just like every part of you is in your body. And there's nothing that can be done to any part of your body that doesn't become part of your global experience. And there's nothing in your global awareness that doesn't actually influence how you use your body in any way and in any relationship, etc. So this is the constant flow of self-awareness. So the self of an individual, the self of the world, the self of a solar system, a galaxy, or a universe is there's levels of self in each of these aspects. And so we could be considered the children of Gaia because we're all dependent on the earth. We could be considered the children of the sun because we're dependent on the sun. But we can be considered the children of the galaxy because none of that could exist without the galaxy, and the galaxy couldn't exist without the universe, and the universe has to have a source, a creative entelechy behind it, because the mathematical odds of it being created by accident are so ridiculously large that you'd have to be a fool to believe that something this complex, amazing, and beautiful can happen by accident. So that's my short version of the answer to your question.
So from what you've just said, would you suggest that when I said, can you walk us through how each of those could be the source of pain? Would you say that actually it's never one on its own, it's all of them at the same time?
Well, think of a cake. If you make a cake, you need at least flour, water, sugar, butter. But you can't call it a cake if you take any of those things out of there. If there's not enough butter or egg to bind it together, it'll just be dust. If there's no sugar, it won't be tasty and you won't want to eat it. If there's no flour, then there's no substance. If there's no water, there's no binding force, and you'll just be eating dust. So when we're talking about cake, we're talking about the emergent property of the marriage of the elements that make the cake. So when we're talking about life, we're talking about something that cannot exist. Spirit is the force of energy and information that holds the archetypes and the basic geometry, such as the Platonic solids, which research shows is the basis of the material world. So the Platonic archetypes are not physical things. They're basically held in what Plotinus would call higher mind, which would be the basis by which God dreams. So God has to have archetypes, or there's no means for God to manifest anything in the dream. So the interrelationship is such that whenever we're producing something with mind or spirit that does not create harmony in a physical system with a nervous system, it produces pain to let you know the outcome of the experiment you're running. So if our thoughts, for example, are the belief that nobody loves us, then our psychological and physiological response will reflect that, and it won't be healthy, and it'll lead to all sorts of other problems and a string of events such as getting put on SSRI drugs or, any number of things. But it'll also have a detrimental effect that'll cause us pain, and eventually, hopefully, somebody will help us look into where those beliefs came from and ask us to investigate if they're really true. And if we do that and we heal that, then we will actually transform the flow of spirit from something that creates the illusion of separation and disconnection to the awareness of connection and family or community or tribe, and then our whole psychological and physical and biochemical profile will change to reflect that. So the first step is our dreaming, and oftentimes we're not aware of what we're dreaming. This is why psychologist Jerry Wesh says if you have a big enough dream, you don't need a crisis. Oftentimes we use crisis in order to help us get more clear on what we do want to create, because we don't realize that we're unconsciously using our potential to create things that are not wholesome or not healthy or not things that we want to be able to continue to do, because the pain just keeps getting greater and greater, such as acting in ways in relationships that lead to separation instead of connection. So the highest level of creation is spirit and dreaming. And then the next level is mind, because now we're moving information that we're thinking about if we're at the conscious level of mind. But if we're not looking into the unconscious aspects of ourselves to find the beliefs, the behaviors, the fears, the insecurities, and the wounds that maybe we're too afraid to look into for fear of the pain of it, then we keep manifesting them, because the unconscious mind is massively more powerful than the conscious mind. The ego is only conscious of about 3 to 5% of its total flow of consciousness, which means about, 95 to, 97% of us is unconscious. But people don't understand that the name unconscious is really a terrible name, because the unconscious is not unconscious. It's just that the ego's not conscious of it. There's tremendous creative agency in the unconscious. In fact, because God itself is dreaming, the entire flow of God's creativity begins as the unconscious. So in essence, the unconscious contains God's habits of creating. So God has the habit of making universes, stars, planets, moons, and creatures. So those are archetypal habits. But those are the way that pure potential gains agency and differentiates itself, the same way if you put white light through a prism, it'll refract into the rainbow. So you could say each of the colors of the rainbow is an archetype from which you can make other things. So what we have is spirit that is conscious in and of itself because God's lucid in its own dream. Then we have mind that is conscious and unconscious, and to the degree that what we're creating unconsciously leads to pain and separation, it helps us direct our awareness to what we're creating. So pain is very, very important. You couldn't function and survive and heal and grow and become without pain as a feedback loop, because you were just creating what you don't want unconsciously probably as often as what you do want, but you would never realize it. We would have destroyed the world a long time ago. We would have warred each other to death, bombed each other to death, and there would be nothing here. So that would stop the play of Maya, that would stop the opportunity for God to experience and come to know its own potential. So this is one of the reasons we have to have a nervous system when we have this level of creativity, because if we didn't have a nervous system to give us the feedback to show us what we were creating, and when we're moving into greater levels of love or moving further away from love, then we would have just obliterated ourselves. The emotional level of pain creates because it carries the exact energy signature. Water always carries the signature of any energy input or any thought, feeling, or emotion, because all of those basically can be converted into signals. How we interpret them depends on our psychological profile and structure of the body we have. A dog, a bird, and a microorganism can all perceive pain to mean something different based on their own body plan and their own needs. So at the emotional level, we have the feeling aspects of pain. So there, fear is not an idea, it's an experience. It's the experience of fear is to move back, to withdraw, to separate yourself from it. And so those things all are influencing the physical body, and the physical body is loaded with nociceptors or pain-sensitive neurons, and those neurons are sending pain to the brain and the nervous system constantly as it's created. And at the level of the body, according to science, pain is actually handled as an emotion. So pain perception is actually the perception of an emotion, just like fear or love or joy. And so the body actually has many mechanisms by which it can perceive pain but also generate pain, but the body does not generate pain on its own. The body is governed by the subconscious mind, which is different than the unconscious. The subconscious mind is the wisdom of the cells and the intelligence of the biological life forms that make the body, which is at a lower level of consciousness. For example, your cells want to eat, they want sunlight, they want warmth, and they want to detoxify themselves so that they can keep living. And they will do that to the very best of their ability, no matter what environment is created emotionally or mentally or spiritually.
You deserve to feel in control of your health and not overwhelmed by it. Most people are given exercises, medications, or generic advice without ever being told why their pain exists. My approach is different. I help you understand your own body, what it's reacting to, and how to create the conditions for healing. If you're ready for that level of clarity and support, you can book a discovery call at bodycheck.co.uk/consultation. Now, back to the show.
So it's rarely ever the body itself that's the form of pain generation. It's almost always something that has to do with what inputs it's getting or not getting. Not enough sunshine leads to problems. Not enough movement, not enough sound diet, not enough rest, all leads to a profile of response in the body that generates pain in some way, shape, or form, which is meant to direct you to getting more of what you're missing. So for a lot of people, most of their pain comes from the fundamental lack of love and relationship. But it shows up as ulcers in the stomach, or digestive troubles, or headaches, or visual disorders, and on goes the list. This is why Jung said neurosis was so important, because if people did not have neurosis as a means of directing the energy created by pain and insecurity and confusion into something such as a digestive disorder, or picking at your skin, or biting your nails, or having a chronic need to look at yourself in the mirror and make yourself beautiful, that people would commit suicide because there would be no means of channeling that psychic energy out of the body or through something that uses energy, and the accumulation would be destructive to the body, because the body operates on the MENS system, minimal electrical neuromuscular stimulation. So if you get a lot of anger in you, for example, it overexcites the system, which is why we call disease disease. It means, as you know, dis-ease, too much energy. So the point I'm making is that the body does not want to be in pain. It always seeks balance or homeostasis if it's given its natural requirements. Dogs out in nature don't go hunting for McDonald's or fast food or a microwave. They eat what is in accordance with their body plan, because it's governed by instincts. But when we are in situations where we are no longer capable of or conscious of how to listen to our instincts, then we start eating things, drinking things, saying things, believing things, and doing things that the body has to survive. And it's important for people to remember that as far as your cells and your body are concerned, your mind is God. The body never says no. If you're happy, the body will have the happy posture and the facial gestures of a happy person. If you're sad, your body will give you the hormonal profile to allow you to feel sadness, the posture and the gesture to feel, express, and communicate your sadness in relationship. The body never says to you, hey, you really should stop having all these negative thoughts because it's giving you an ulcer. The body is totally and utterly subservient to the mind of the individual, and the emotions are the interaction between the mind and the body, both from the bottom up. You're killing me because you're eating crap. The emotions are an expression of the threat that the body is under, or the emotions are the pain that's now being medicated by junk food, drugs, etc. So you see there's this dynamic interplay between mind and body, but the body is always trying to bring you toward balance, and that's what your instincts do. Your instincts tell you at a deep level when you're moving in the wrong direction to support life itself. So this is a major, major problem, because from religion to education to diet to lifestyle factors, we have, for a very, very long period of time now, probably since we lived in tribal societies, gotten so far from being in touch with our instinctual systems and gotten so trapped in our heads that we now have the sickest population in the world at all ages, the most psychological problems, and the most suicide ever in recorded history, because we've actually been programmed to believe a lot of thoughts and ideas that are just not true and don't work out, that don't make your body feel safe, don't make you feel emotionally whole and safe, and fill your head full of dangerous ideas. And then we've also got an approach to the body that is drug-based, chemically based, surgically based, and symptom-based, because it's so profitable, and we avoid actually the opportunity to do the deeper work of connecting to the body, loving the body, and learning from the body, and letting it guide us to what thoughts, feelings, emotions, beliefs, and behaviors are actually detrimental to the body. But a dog or a cat or a bear or a cow can't get away with that, because they don't have drugs in the toolkit and surgeons to fix up broken bones. So if nature would have put a cerebral cortex on the animals in nature, nature itself would have collapsed because they would have departed from the plan and the unique function that they have in nature. And so nature itself would have basically disintegrated into death. And that's unfortunately what we're doing to ourselves and to nature due to the problems that I've just been describing.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah.
here's a way to think about it. I'll just share this one thought with you. You know, I was recently talking to somebody about AI and the threats of AI. And their comeback to me was, well, I don't think we should be worried about that because it's all nature. We're all expressions of nature. So whatever we create is an expression of nature. Now, that's a cute way to avoid the responsibility for what we're creating. So I'd like to share with you what I said to them, because I think everybody right now needs to ponder this very deeply. The human cerebral cortex is capable of creating things that are either supportive of life or antagonistic to life. We're the only creature on this planet that destroys its own habitat and increases its chances of death versus life. But in nature, all death feeds life.
Mm.
So no matter what dies in nature, it actually becomes food for and the support of life. When plants die, for example, at the end of their growth season, they decompose into the soil, they become humus, which feeds the microorganisms, which then becomes the means by which new life is fostered, grown, and developed into something that all living things can eat based on whatever eats it. But when the human being reaches the point that it uses its intellect to create death that no longer feeds life, then what we do is we continue to draw resources from the planet and from nature as a whole that are not being returned to support life. And so there's a tipping point that we're marching toward very quick, where the rate of death and extraction so exceeds the rate of regeneration and new life that life will ultimately cease to exist. So the key point is we are products of nature, but we've achieved a level of intellectual ability to create death that doesn't feed life. Nuclear bombs don't feed life. Chemical waste does not feed life. Using pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, rodenticide, and glyphosate does not feed life. It kills life. Lighting fires that burn cities to make smart cities kills life. It does not feed life. Poisoning people with vaccines that don't support life kills life. And on goes the list. So artificial intelligence is actually got no sentient awareness as to whether or not what it's creating is life affirmative or life destructive. And when people begin to reach a level of a deficiency in connection to life, instincts, love, and relationship, that they begin to take guidance from a source of intelligence that is actually not human and does not depend on nature for its own existence, then we're now crossing from being human into being, alien to nature, because there's nothing in nature that doesn't support life. But we're now right on the precipice of becoming transhuman and alien, which means we either have to figure out how to live without biological bodies in a biological ecosphere and become machines, or we have to turn around and figure out how to use these technologies in ways that are life affirmative, or we're going to create a level of pain for ourselves that we can't come back from. And so this whole thing with AI, I'm only using as a means of showing you what happens when you depart from nature and what happens when the intellect produces outcomes that we don't pay attention to emotionally and physically and physiologically and relationally and socially and culturally. And I'm showing you how dangerous the mind can be to the body without a sound education of the relationship between mind, emotions, and body. And I'm showing you what happens when pain becomes a profitable venture for which hospitals actually aren't really interested in getting rid of your pain. They're just really interested in medicating it. So you have a disease maintenance system, not a healthcare system. And when you look at what human beings have done to each other and done to nature, you can see that we are aborting nature's means of handling pain. Nature's means of handling pain is always to try to heal it. If a dog get hurt, it'll shake itself off, and if it's got a wound, it'll go lay in a cold river, and it'll take advantage of the healing effects of the water. It'll go eat herbs or plants that have healing effects. They all know which ones heal for their own body plan. But what we're doing now is we're completely and utterly transcending the biological inheritance that paradoxically created a cerebral cortex, but is now actually using the powers of a cerebral cortex to override its instincts and its survival drives and create massive levels of destruction that lead to massive levels of pain that are soon to go beyond what the medical system can medicate, because we now have a level of psychological pain, fear, and insecurity because we're cutting our umbilical cord to life while making money and while thinking we're smart, while making ourselves more and more unintelligent and less creative and more machine-like. And so all these promises of AI, as Steiner would say, are eremonic, which means that they're machine consciousness and heavy materialism without the consciousness of life. And they're also creating a lot of illusions that if we don't have enough innate understanding and connection to what life is and what love is and what relationship is and what the reason that we're here together is, then we can unconsciously try to create an escape, just like people commit suicide to escape the pain they're in. But when we have as many people on a planet that are lost and confused spiritually, religiously, mentally, emotionally, and physically, then people actually unconsciously get exhausted of the experience of life, and then, without realizing what they're doing, support the creation of destructive technologies that ultimately is a slow creation of a suicide vehicle, which is exactly what people do when they're lose the point at which they feel they can create love and connection in their own life.
Yeah, Paul, I'm just aware of time because I know you haven't got a lot of time left. I'm going to ask you one more question and then we'll wrap up. So,
Okay.
in recent years, pain science has moved heavily towards the biopsychosocial model. And I'm talking especially about,
Thank God.
well, there's a but coming.
Okay.
But there are some people that in that model, so to speak, that would suggest that there's no link between posture and pain. In that aspect, do you think that the pendulum might have swung too far away from the physical aspect of pain?
Well, that is a degree of intellect that is so disconnected from what is obvious. Anybody that looks in a mirror at themselves can even pretend they're happy and see the body's responses, and look at the obvious. This is no more stupid than saying that dogs and cats don't have emotions. Well, anyone that's ever had a dog or a cat, or most animals, I mean, we own a farm. I mean, I know when the goats are frustrated or upset or whatever. You can't have a biopsychosocial model that makes such statements unless you have an illusion of biopsychosocial medicine. What you're describing is exactly what's led medicine into a state of now being hospitals being more dangerous to be in than safe to be in, which led to doctors foregoing the Hippocratic Oath and vaccinating people with things that they don't even know the ingredients, the outcome, or the research on. So what you're seeing is basically a global collapse of common sense and rationality and even our capacity to use intuition and insight and instinct and wisdom to make decisions. You know, I will quote a statement by Wolfgang Pauli, one of the founders of quantum physics, who somebody once said something very stupid to him. He said, "That's worse than stupid." Okay, so to say something like that, I mean, and I don't know if you ever saw it, but there was some MD that said posture doesn't mean anything and all that. I gave quite a powerful rebuttal to him. But to have a medical doctor say something like that is no different than saying that nutrition doesn't matter, or water doesn't matter, or sleep doesn't matter. You have to be so disconnected from your own experience in your own body to even make a statement like that. The fact that they give people degrees for thinking that way means that our education system is now so diseased that it's producing generations of people that are likely to be wanting chips in their head and believe they can upload their soul to a cloud, and will allow the same people that say there is no soul and there is no God to do it. Because they're the ones that are telling you they can upload your soul to a cloud, which is just yet another one of the paradoxes of the complexity of the human mind that can be so stupid it's unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, I know you've got to go, and I could probably talk. Well, I was going to say I could talk to you for another 6 hours, but you could talk for another 6 hours. I should put it that way.
Well, you ask questions, I give answers. I can do another 6 minutes.
Yeah, well, I think it's a good point to kind of wrap up. But what I was just going to say is just give you the opportunity to maybe talk a little bit about Spirit Gym, and maybe with a link in terms of how that might apply to someone who's actually experiencing pain themselves.
Well, Spirit Gym is really the synthesis of my life's work. The Spirit Gym online mentorship training program is a synthesis of my 15-volume book set. Volume 1's going to come out soon, any month, I don't know, in the next month or so. It's on its way to the printer now. But what I did is I took all my life experience, all the knowledge I've gained from all the kinds of things we've been talking about, I synthesized it into a 15-volume set that's based on 10 principles that I think we all have to be aware of in order to live a life that gives us freedom, gives us meaning, and gives us a chance to create individually and collectively something that's ultimately good for the future of the human race, which would be our children. And that includes how to eat, how to move, how to breathe, how to, be healthy. And the online training program has this 15-volume book set synthesized into 75 lessons for about 85 hours of training, which you get with the Master Key membership. So it's like a sort of an online university of my core teachings. And then we have a weekly meeting called a Sangha, which is where we get together and I either give a lesson on a specific topic that I think is helpful for the members, or directly out of the Master Key lessons to bring a topic into focus, or I open the airways so that anybody that has questions about life, about health, can get the same kind of guidance I give my private patients and clients that do either healing work or life coaching work with me. And there's a community where everybody can share. I guide people through healing, development, spiritual exercises of many different types, meditations, practices. It's a meta-myth structure, so I basically created Spirit Gym so that people of any belief system could use the principles and practices to grow spiritually. And then I just teach them to question their own beliefs each step of the way, because once you believe, you stop asking questions and you stop growing. So I encourage all Spirit Gym practitioners to always have your best working hypothesis, but leave it open to growth and expansion so that you don't stagnate and create limitations for yourself that often lead to pain. And so there's different levels of membership. There's the community membership. There's my Spirit Gym podcast membership, which is part of Spirit Gym. Then there's the level that lets you attend all the sanghas but doesn't give you access to the library of the Master Key teachings. And the highest level is called the Master Key membership, where you have access to all the training plus the sanghas plus the community. And then you also get the extended podcast versions and Q&A with podcast guests and stuff like that. All that's available at myspiritgym.com, myspiritgym.com. And the community right now is just under 600 people, and it's full of absolutely amazing, beautiful people that we have done a lot of great work on. We're now on our we're coming up to our 76th Sangha, which we do once a week. So there's a tremendous amount of information. Most of the Sanghas run about 3 hours, and they're all recorded. So if people are in different time zones, they can always get the teachings. They can write questions in. So there's, no matter where you're at in the world, you have access to it 24 hours a day. You have a community of people that are committed to learning and growing and healing together and being the change the world needs now. I started it to create a grassroots movement of people that were willing to embrace consciousness, heal, grow, and become a living example to others, so that we could, instead of waiting for some savior to come rescue us or the government to fix the problems, which has never worked in the past, we could actually get together, heal, grow, and dream together and co-create together and work to inspire everybody we can to basically find a collective dream that we all agree is important, such as taking care of the planet, and get behind it and look at how we can revise the education system, the food system, natural resources, and go from dogmatic religious ideologies to a more wholesome spiritual perspective, where we really just want to grow in love and in consciousness together, so that we can create more beauty and more good and more truth for the generations to come.
Awesome. Great stuff. And I'll make sure any links are in the show notes. Well, I'll speak with Penny and make sure all the links are in there. But Paul, thanks a lot for your time. Really appreciate your time. I know you're on a tight schedule today, but I've absolutely loved it, and I'm sure the audience were going to get a lot out of it as well.
Well, it's a synthesis of me now. This January, I've been a therapist for 42 years, so I've had time to study a lot, and I've worked with, as you know, thousands and thousands of the best athletes in the world and workers and everybody, and I've, certainly lived a full life. So what I've shared is the synthesis of, 4 decades of committed study, practice, and interaction and working with people. And, to some people, I might sound like a crazy man, but when you commit yourself to 40 years of study, you get deeper and deeper and deeper. And what used to sound crazy turns out to be dangerously true.
Yeah. Well, there's another guy I know that was called crazy for a long period of time, and everyone's starting to realize he's been right all along. And he's also another guy that if you ask him a question, it takes him a long time to answer, and that's David Icke.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. So,
all right, thank you, Lee.
As Vinnie Jones would say, it's been emotional. But yeah, thanks for your time. And I'll see you soon.
All right, bud. Lots of love.
So that's it from Paul and me for this week. But be sure to tune in, same time, same place, next week on Beyond the Pain. Thanks for listening to Beyond the Pain. If this episode resonated, please follow the show, leave a review, or share it with someone you know who's been struggling. And remember, pain is not permanent. With the right insight and support, you can turn it into power. Until next time, stay open, stay strong, and keep moving beyond the pain.